Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our Wednesday roundtable at Lido, and we wish you well. Before we begin our discussions today, okay, before we begin our discussions today, we would like to remember a resource person and friend who took part in our previous discussions on foreign affairs. A resource person and good friend, former Foreign Secretary Perfecto Ariasay Jr., passed away last Friday as the country celebrated its 122nd Independence Day. He died from pneumonia triggered by the Big C. And our thoughts are with him and his family. May he rest in eternal peace. We also remember another good friend, Dr. Eileen Baviera San Pablo, who passed away earlier due to the dreaded COVID-19 from her trip uh, in Paris, France. Today, we will try to find out how the United States relations evolved into what it is today. We will try to find out from our resource persons their views on what strengthened the relationships, be it in terms of defense, business, commerce, and trade, and people to people engagements. It is impossible for us Filipinos not to have any relative or acquaintance, if any, if not all, of the 50 states of the world's biggest economy. Last Friday, Defense Secretary Delfin Lorenzana talked with his American counterpart, Secretary Mark T. Esper, and according to the Department of National Defense release, they talked about their respective countries' response to the COVID-19 pandemic. It was also during the conversation that Secretary Esper extended his appreciation for the Philippine government's decision to suspend the abrogation of the Visiting Forces Agreement, which is a detailed part of the Mutual Defense Treaty of 1951. In the same statement, the two defense officials talked about the prevailing conditions at the South China Sea. How important is the United States of America in this part of the world? How will our government's decision to suspend the abrogation of the Visiting Forces Agreement impact on the country's independent foreign policy? According to published surveys, most Filipinos feel at ease with the United States of America more than any other country. As of December 31, 2018, there were 4,037,564 Filipinos in the United States. Foreign remittances from the United States last year amounted to 11,318,335,000. We will now begin. Mga kaibigan, panauhin po natin si Dr. Clarita Carlos, dating Pangulo ng National Defense College of the Philippines, si Dr. Chester B. Cabalza, graduate ng Military Diplomacy ng PLA National Defense University sa China at ngayon ay nasa University of the Philippines. Kasama rin natin si Dr. Lucio Blanco Pitlo III ng Asia Pacific Pathways to Progress at nakapag-aral din sa American University. Si Dr. Aaron Jed Rabena ng Asia Pacific Pathways to Progress na nag-aral naman sa Shandong University, among others. We're expecting Attorney J. Batong Bakal to join us a bit later dahil magbabayad muna siya ng buwis. Sabi niya, yun muna ang kanyang priority ngayon. Let's begin with the opening statement of Dr. Clarita Carlos. Magandang araw po and welcome to the discussions, Dr. Carlos.
Hi, good morning, Melo at ang ating mga kasamang resource persons. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation, which is really so relevant at this time, considering that we are watching and listening to so many movements of aircraft carriers in the contested South China Sea. Sana mahimay-himay natin ito at kung ano ang ibig sabihin nito sa atin dito sa Pilipinas. Salamat, Melo.
Clarita Carlos sa kanyang opening statement. Hindi ko alam na meron palang military diplomacy as a course. Dr. Cabalsa, welcome. Magandang umaga po.
Yes,
Good
hello,
morning.
good morning.
Yes.
Yeah, magandang umaga po sa mga tagapakinig and of course to all our viewers. Thank you for inviting me here. It's my first time to join the group. And there's a military diplomacy. I was invited by I was sent by the National Defense College at the time when I took up that course at the People's Liberation Army in the National Defense University in Beijing, China. So basically, most of my classmates there were defense attaches worldwide. No? So mukhang ako ata yung minority doon dahil ako yung isa lang sa mga civilian defense analyst that was invited at the time. But basically, China is gaining strength right now, and definitely they have global ambitions, and we've seen that in their maritime expansionism in the South China Sea. So China is a reality, and we have to confront it properly, and hopefully we will resolve our security and political issues with them.
Yeah, thank you. Opening statement pa lang yan mga kaibigan. Si Dr. Lucio Blanco Pitlo this time. Can we hear from Dr. Lucio Blanco Pitlo? Your views about what's going on. Is America still relevant to us?
Good morning. Maraming salamat sa pag-imbita, Sir Melo. At it's a great privilege to join you this morning in Manila to have this conversation, very timely and very relevant. Just a minor correction, I'm presently studying here at American University in Washington, D.C. I think I'm the only nurse among all the doctors that are I'm with this morning.
Yeah.
And it's very humbling to be surrounded by the giants.
Yeah.
So certainly America plays a role, very important role for Philippine external defense, and also in light of recent developments in the South China Sea, and of course the ongoing rivalry between US and China that is only bound to exacerbate because of the pandemic. So of course, just a few days ago, we see a very strong show of force coming from US aircraft carriers, flying the waters of the Indo-Pacific to show strength, amidst the adversity, and of course to signal to security allies and partners in the region that America is here to stay. And of course, it's also a show to China that even though the U.S. was initially hampered because of the several U.S. I think one or two U.S. aircraft carriers suffered from outbreaks of COVID-19 within their ships. So that initially hampered their readiness. But I think they're trying to show now that this is a temporary thing, and U.S. is an enduring force in the region, and that is U.S. is here to stay.
Okay. All right. Dr. Rabena, would you care to tell us your views? It used to be said we cannot ignore the elephant in the room, and that's China. But it appears that there are two elephants today, the Americans and the Chinese, whom we cannot ignore. What's your take on this?
First of all, good morning, Sir Melo, and to the rest of the resource persons. I'm Claire. So I think with the suspension of the VFA termination, perhaps the president was made to realize that our country's relations with both major powers need not be zero-sum. Meaning, while we are pursuing engagements with China, we need not abandon our security relations or alliance or downgrade our alliance with the United States.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So will this not impact on the independent foreign policy that the president has espoused since he took power in July 1st of 2016?
So I think he is following through with that. Meaning, as we continue to deepen our ties with China, we can also simultaneously deepen our security ties with the United States. So it's not really either or, sir, I think, to the president, sir. So that's why the suspension is a subtle way of saying that we want the security relationship to be maintained.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Dr. Carlos, sa ganitong pagkakataon, you mentioned kasi na ang dapat ginagawa sa South China Sea ay magkaroon ng pag-uusap at kasunduan tungkol sa resources. And the most important resource is yung marine resources. Do you think it's still possible at this point in time?
Yes, tama ka, Melo. Natandaan mo no mga previous interaction conversations natin dyan sa Tapatan at sa iba pang venues. Talagang palagi kong pinupush forward yung regional fishing agreement. Kasi yung Code of Conduct, sus Maria Jose, parang 30 years ago na ata natin pinag-uusapan at hindi tayo umuusad. Wala, usap lang ng usap, so nagsasayang lang tayo ng resources at oras. Ang Regional Fishing Agreement ay kailangan natin para hindi ang China ang nagsasabi kung kailan pwedeng mangisda, kung saan pwedeng mangisda, kung kailan ang fishing holiday. Dapat yan, every country washed by the contested waters will have a say. And that includes beyond the 6 claimant countries, kasama na tayo doon sa 6, no? At yun nga, ito yung tinatawag natin sa IR na low politics area, pag-usapan tungkol sa isda. Hindi pwedeng yung China ang nagsasabi kung kailan mangisda, kung saan pwedeng mangisda. Kasi, tama ka, Melo, yung isda talaga yung resource niyan eh. Kasi lahat tayo lumalayo na tayo sa oil eh. So, okay, may oil dyan, natural gas, pero habang lumalapit tayo at lumalawak ang renewable energy sources natin, nagiging less and less potent yung tinatawag na oil resources in the contested sea. So, if we think differently, hindi yung military, tapos yung weaponized 7 artificial islands na siguro di-discuss ko din mamaya, ay magkaroon ng bagong perspektiba at this time, a regional fishing agreement is, I think, more likely to come about rather than the so-called Code of Conduct.
Okay. All right. Dr. Cabalza, isang bagay po na mahalaga rin na pag-usapan, yung pagkakaroon ng bagong consideration sa Coast Guard. Noon kasi, ang Coast Guard is civilian. Pero ngayon, it's part of the military already. Don't you think this further complicates the issues within the South China Sea?
Yeah. Yes, basically, we have those kinds of frameworks in looking at kind of scenarios. But, we have to understand also the situation on the ground and what China wants from us. I'm looking at the scenarios where China wants 3 things from us. No, one is the closure of the our strategic and defense posture in the West Philippine Sea. Either we concede to a China-centric code of conduct in the South China Sea and accept their terms, or suffer unjust maritime aggression, because China knows well that Filipinos will fight for our great territories in the West Philippine Sea, but with limitations only to the Pag-asa Island, since we already have a community there. So they will get all the other islands that we are claiming in that contested islands, and that is how they will manage the Hague ruling conundrum that we want so far. And secondly, China wants an equal footing in the Philippines, just like what the US is enjoying for decades. They will do this through the Belt Road Initiative package by supporting our Build program. And we will see that in the post-pandemic, China will offer recovery, economic, and health programs to our government. And lastly, China would want to overhaul their China's soft power approach to Filipinos. We've seen the backlash and dislikes of they received during the viral song of friendship, yung Iisang Dagat nila, no, last April. And it shows up China's schizophrenic behavior with that one hand helping the Filipinos during the COVID pandemic, while on the other hand, they are terrifying our fishermen in the West Philippine Sea. So we saw all this one. And another thing is the use of the paramilitary or yung mga kanilang militia, and of course the white ships, the Coast Guard. So basically, in this kind of psychological warfare that we're seeing in the West Philippines right now, no, nakikita natin na mas lamang yung paggamit ng Coast Guard. So I think we really have to strengthen our Coast Guard also, because basically it's a white ships battle so far that we're seeing in the West Philippine Sea.
Okay. But Dr. Carlos, would you agree na ganun na lang yung ating treatment dun sa issue? How will we stand as a sovereign country? We're joined by foreign correspondents as well. So we have to talk in English, Dr. Carlos.
Okay. The key word is interdependence, which means that the enemy is not any country. The enemy is really climate change and its consequences, of which pandemic might be one.
Uh-huh.
And therefore, we would like to harness the collective sense of the ASEAN plus the ASEAN plus plus, including China for that matter, and really protect the resources there. You're right, no? There's only one ecology there. The sea plants there, they are related to each other. If you watch it from above, you will see that there is only one continuous seawater there. And therefore, for us, including us for that matter, to subdivide it is really both absurd and unacceptable. So let's change our framework in regard to that. For a long, long time, the UP Marine Science Institute has always been in the forefront of wanting to declare that as one marine ecology, so that we will all be interested in preserving it. And so no one country will just harvest the fish therein, and there will be cooperation all around, resource sharing. And the regional fishing agreement that I talked about earlier will have a resource sharing part for sure.
Okay. Thank you. But how do you deal with the hawks and the doves in China, who may have different points of view on how to treat countries like the Philippines?
Well, they have all the right to declare what they want to declare, in the same way that there are also hawks and doves here in the Philippines. But I think at bottom, it will really be the doves, who will prevail, because I don't know, we'll just kill each other until we all disappear. I mean, let the pandemic do that, kill everybody that who are vulnerable and reckless and careless. But yes, let's continue to take care of the resources there, because that is one ecosystem. And we keep on telling China, the artificial islands that you keep on weaponizing and increasing its military capability, that is not to anybody's interest. It is in the interest of people for you to change that, to transform that into research stations. Like you also have research stations in Antarctica. And so the marine scientists and oceanologists, I mean, it's so easy to change the facilities there from military to non-military.
Okay. That being the case, how would we deal with the United States, who declared an American pivot to Asia during Barack Obama's time, but did not materialize due to the economic crisis they had? So how will that be? The Americans are here to stay?
I don't think so. That pivot to Asia was all saliva, and that was because they were moving away from the Middle East. They were also moving away from across the Atlantic. But you know what Trump is doing, and now the term Asia Pacific, they changed it to Indo-Pacific already, and that means they already included India there. So what are we doing? They're again dividing the world into spheres of influence, and we should not be part of that. Alliance systems are dead. Let's just talk about interdependence, what works for everybody, and what works for everybody is cooperation all around. I don't know that,
Okay.
dividing the world into alliances works. It does not work anymore.
Yeah. Dr. Cabalsa, you have a PhD in anthropology.
Yeah.
Would you care to tell us the basis for Philippines-China relations and that of the Philippines and U.S. relations?
Right. So actually, I'm looking at the trilateral relationships of course, the U.S., China, and the Philippines here. And I have some key points here. No, let me begin with this one. China is actually intently watching the upcoming U.S. presidential elections in November. So as long as President Trump will be staying in the White House until 2025, China will be on the offensive side of the maritime expansionist aggression in South China Sea. And it will set a timely comeback after it suffered from the deadly backlash from the COVID-19 pandemic and the continuous domestic violence in Hong Kong and Taiwan's winning streak of its mass diplomacy. Now, economic-wise, we will be seeing more of an intensified China-US trade war 2.0 in the post-COVID-19 period. China will retreat inwardly, although that's going to be temporarily for the meantime in post-pandemic to assess its self-critique its own economic value and damages that it has caused to its domestic market and global economy. I think that is one of the values of socialist communist countries, where they critique and self-critique their actions. And we have a precedence of this. No, there was a political backlash happened during the Cultural Revolution after the Tiananmen massacre in Beijing, at the time when Mao Zedong solidified the Chinese Communist Party. But we also saw how Deng Xiaoping opened up Chinese economy that paved way for Chinese economic renaissance today. But this is how Xi Jinping will try to overhaul the Chinese economy in the post-pandemic period, while allowing himself to enjoy his position as the world's super powerful leader, and observing at how President Trump will struggle for his return to the White House if he gets re-elected, amid the systemic racism embedded in American institutions and the rapid flow of racial pandemic globally. Now, China will also try to capitalize on the viral and racial pandemics in the US to undermine its leadership vacuum across the globe. China will also contain the US on its naval presence in the South China Sea, although they have the pivot to Asia. Yeah, I agree with Dr. Carlos there that it's really meant to be that way. And now they have the Indo-Pacific, and it's not really that strategic at all. And as long as Xi Jinping's indefinite term limit as president of China will not expire, he will exhaust all his hard powers, definitely. And the US will be seeing a splintering regional order, as this will bring an open space for global leadership vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
Nations and grouping will have a divided reliance from China and the US. And I doubt if US will push forward for multilateralism after what they did, or after they withdrew from the WHO. And more or less, China and the US will not become the champion of global order brought by the pandemic, and we will be seeing more of their dispersal of influence and authority. So that's how basically I view it from the political and economic. But strategically speaking, now, since we're talking about the suspension of the abrogation of the Visiting Forces Agreement, this matters most to China's Politburo. That means that the People's Liberation Army Navy will continuously flex its muscles, naval powers in the region, and we will be seeing more of a show of force, just like Jed mentioned earlier on in the South China Sea, more aggression and intimidation using the militia boats and the Coast Guard to control its maritime domains. And we've seen that during the recent visit of Secretary Lorenzana in Pagasa Island, where Pagasa Island is basically guarded by Chinese militia boats and the white ships. And that also means that the South China Sea will be more militarized, as the People's Liberation Army Navy, including its Air Force, will control its air defense, maritime borders, land territories, and even the cyberspace, perfecting a saber-rattle strategy. You know, we have already experienced these cyber disruptions and waves of malwares that we recently experienced because of the Facebook account cloning recently to weaken our cybersecurity infrastructure. There were some conspiracy theorists were saying that because of the suspended abrogation of the VFA, there was an attack in our cyberspace, and that is alarming because it only happened in the Philippines. You imagine the Facebook cloning account cloning only in the Philippines. Why it didn't happen to other countries? So that is really suspicious, and this will come into reality when President Trump gets re-elected, and the suspension of the abrogation of the VFA and other military agreements with the United States will not be lifted. So imagine how China will work hard for that. And especially for the 2022 national elections in the Philippines, we will see this is an emergency crisis management for China. And this is like a referendum of the Filipinos' choice of which great power will dominate in our foreign and economic policies. Either a Manchurian candidate wins or the White House bet will get elected in the Malacanang. So we will see all these kinds of dynamics basically by 2022. And definitely China will react also to the candidates that the US will be supporting come 2022 based from what China perceives. And also, what I'm gonna the point, the lesson that we can draw from this competition is that the next Philippine president should be a good player, meaning to say that he or she must be pro-Philippine interests and pro-Filipino, willing to negotiate with Beijing and Washington to equally negotiate with Beijing and Washington equally and fearlessly. He or she should not bandwagon with any major powers, but to treat them as co-equals and
Okay.
hegemonic competitors in the region.
Okay. But by the looks of it, what we get to see these days are cartoon characters, no? Who dream of becoming presidents, no? And that is the problem. We'd like to welcome a good friend and resource person, si Associate Dean J. Batong Bakal. Magandang araw po. Alam kong nagbayad na kayo ng inyong buwis. Welcome to the program. Good
Hi,
morning.
Good morning.
morning.
Yeah, kababayad lang. That's why we did good service.
Good. But tell us your views. Hindi magtatagal, 4 na taon na yung desisyon ng Arbitral Tribunal. At nagkaroon kayo ng matrix na pinresenta noon sa Wednesday Roundtable at Lido a day after. Actually, 12 hours after the decision was made.
Yes.
And unfortunately, yung nagbasa noong statement sa DFA, namaya pa na ang kaibigan nating si Jun Yasay. Hanggang saan na tayo? Where have we gone after the decision?
Well, I'd probably say not much, no? In terms of, say, kasi ang dami nun, di ba? Submissions and may submissions pa. Ang pinaka-importante, of course, is yung declaration na invalid yung Chinese claim. And on that point nga, when you look back at the statement so far coming from the chief executive, no? Parang even that hindi pa talaga ina-assert yung position na yun, because there were certain instances where the president, for example, kept saying na yes, it is ours, but China has a historic claim. So in that sense, even the chief executive has not been asserting that part, which is the most important part of the decision. The others, the vindication of our exclusive economic zone, the allocation of jurisdiction in accordance with UNCLOS, medyo, in a way, ambivalent. Naging ambivalent ang government because for a while they were very silent to the point that again, the president would say that he was not going to enforce our jurisdiction on Chinese fishing in our exclusive economic zone, no? Regardless that the tribunal already said that it was illegal. So, and yet, recently, you had the Philippines invoking the arbitral decision in a note verbal submitted to the Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf. No?
Mm-hmm.
So, parang you had 3 years na wala, and then recently, biglang i-assert. So, that's why I'm saying it's a bit ambivalent. The issue here, of course, is that you have to be consistent. No? As a country, every time there's an opportunity, you have to assert the position, you have to state the position in order to maintain that consistency. If at any point you become inconsistent, no, you say the opposite thing, no, that undermines the credibility of the state with respect to that position. And in the future, it might actually be used against you. No, to say na regardless of what you've said and done recently, in the past, you said the opposite thing, and therefore you cannot now assert the position that you said recently. No? Parang you keep changing your mind. So hindi pwede yun. that undermines your legal position.
Yeah. Okay. One basic question for you, Associate Dean Jay Batong Bakal, is this: uh, the government said we will suspend the abrogation of the VFA. What implications have you seen in the horizon with this decision recently?
Well, think about it from, say, the standpoint of China, it's not really that significant from a strategic point of view, because from the beginning naman, they assume that the Philippines is in the US corner, so that until it actually happened, until the abrogation actually took place, then they would not really give much weight to the announcement that it is being terminated. Kumbaga, wait and see lang sila until it actually happens. So now that it has been suspended, it doesn't really change their calculations very much. And in fact, the VFA, they know, would be a bonus for them. Marami naman silang bonus from us. It would have been an additional bonus for them because it would have impeded U.S. operations in the South China Sea. But now that it is ongoing, or now that they announced that they are suspending the termination, parang wala naman nagbago on the ground. That's why you'll notice that since February when it was announced, the tempo, the kinds of actions and activities of China in the South China Sea didn't really change. So all the maritime militia is still there. All the China Coast Guard are still around Pag-asa Island, and their announcements are still ongoing as if nothing happened. Okay, so it doesn't really impact their calculations that much. On the part of the US, yun yung problema siguro because of the uncertainty. Syempre, yung planning horizon nila is placed into doubt. Before February, if I recall, late last year, around November, Secretary of Defense Esper came, and I'm sure they had discussions with our SMB. I'm sure they had plans. They had been planning for a very huge, very large Balikatan exercise. And I'm sure there were many activities there that did not necessarily also involve having troops in the Philippines. So partly that was affected negatively by the pandemic. Of course, you had to cancel a huge proportion of the exercise. But I'm sure there were other exercises, other cooperative activities that were planned, which might have continued, but because of this uncertainty, I'm sure they had to slow down, because it really came out of the blue, and in a way you suddenly were looking at a 180-day deadline. So if you were going to mobilize resources and people, knowing that it will end in 180 days, parang why? I mean, why go through the trouble? So naantala yun, I'm sure.
Okay.
It's a relief for them probably that na-suspend yung termination, but still it's only for 6 months. So there's still no certainty beyond the 6-month period. At best, probably they will be able to push through with some activities that are planned for the year, But beyond that, it's still uncertain na naman.
Would you venture to say what triggered the change in temperature?
Well, I'm looking back, syempre we don't know how this government makes decisions. That's one of the mysteries of the past couple of years. But if I were to hazard a guess, I would suspect that the fact that the Chinese maritime militia and the activities around the Kalayaan Island Group were still at the same level, yung tempo niya at an increased tempo, it was still being maintained. And then the conclusion, the fact that they finished the beaching ramp, okay, because that was just step one, kumbaga, for the planned renovations on Pag-asa. After the beaching ramp, you would have all the other facilities now be built, Kasi pwede mo nang dalhin yung mga cargo and whatever materials you need. And syempre, if you're the military, you had just spent all of this time and money and resources preparing, for this repair and renovations, and you got to the point where you prepared the groundwork, so to speak, and bigla na lang, when you're about to do the really the really hard part, all the infrastructure, the important part, biglang nawawalan yung cover mo, no? Nawawalan ka ng protective cover. You would, syempre, you would have you would have a dilemma
Okay.
whether you want to continue that or not. So it's good for them. I would think that it would be better for them to have some certainty about the BFA, because they would be able to have that sort of security cover in a way, no? Kahit ba konti lang yan, it's still useful for this next phase of the repair and renovation. No? So that is, I would think that that's one, no? Important factor. Probably there are others na came into play, no? But the point is, I would think that they saw that allowing the termination to continue on schedule in August would not be good for.
Okay. Okay. Dr. Carlos, may I have your views about the importance of the Mutual Defense Treaty, which is the root of the Visiting Forces Agreement? Is it still important? Do we have to review it? Do we have to change it? Do we have to get rid of it?
Well, 2 years ago, I remembered Secretary of Defense Lorenzana already asked for a review of the same. And I think it really is needed. By the way, Melo, for the information of the others, I've been with the Visiting Forces Commission for 5 years now, no, and counting. And therefore, I've really followed very closely what is happening in terms of the Balikatan, Cobra Gold, and all the other exercises. And one of the things that I really see, and I'm sure my colleague Jay also had seen very often, and we lament about, is that there's really no strategic thinking happening in our country. No? Either it's fragmented, or people are not really seeing the strategic whole of where we are and how to locate ourselves within this security and defense environment. And that is one deficit really of what we're doing. So nobody even advised the president that the BFA is just one of the legs of the Mutual Defense Treaty. You know, whenever they have planning, immediately they have the SEB, the Securities Engagement Board, and of course the EDCA. So all three really are part of the enabling. These are enablers of the Mutual Defense Treaty. Because the treaty by itself, because we sent out the Americans in 1991, it has no meaning. I mean, it does not have any operational teeth on the ground until later, when in 1999, the Visiting Forces Agreement was ratified by the Senate. And therefore, if you want to break that part of the leg, you will also break that other part, which talks about non-military, the Securities Engagement Board, which is just, I think, Jay, parang it's not only an executive agreement. I really don't know what created the SEB. I remembered Hillary Clinton was still the state secretary at the time. No? So there are three: the EDCA, the SEB, and the BFA. So it's like a troika. So you cannot be breaking the BFA. Now there is so many hundreds of days of the so-called extension, and let the SEB and the EDCA stand, because they will not stand. What will happen, Melo, is that you will only have the Mutual Defense Treaty. Again, nothing is just toothless, because these are the ones that are implementing them. The reason why you have Americans in 5 military bases here in the Philippines is because of EDCA. The reason why whenever they have planners, they always have planners from the Security Engagement Board is because of the SEB. And the reason why the BFA has planners for all aspects of cooperation is because of the BFA. Okay. Unfortunately, even the hard work that we did there at the Visiting Forces Commission, among which was, of course, the IRR. Did you know the IRR came only 16 years after the BFA? 1999, that's the BFA. The IRR was finished in June 2016. When in principle, your IRR should come within 60 days from the time, something comes out. And I hope that anti-terror bill, by the way, will not wait 16 years for them to operationalize what that means. No, that's a long time. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, there are just too many. Sometimes we're not even telescoping the deficits from our side, Melo, but there's really a huge hole there, a huge vacuum in strategic thinking. That's why, the CISOing that Jay talked about a while back, that's the reality of our decision making. And yes, it will really weaken us because at a later time, when we want to push something, they'll say, you remember, on this, you said you backpedaled and you said something like this. So yeah, we're so many
Okay.
days from another election, and I hope we'll have better leadership.
Yeah. But the question remains, can the president be advised? And would he take advice? Coming from your end, looking objectively, Professor, are you
Um,
optimistic?
I know I read somewhere because I don't buy broadsheets anymore. I think Jay might know this better. That there was a Supreme Court decision, something like asking the president to explain why he did not include the Senate in the decision making in regard to the VFA, because the Senate was part of treated the BFA even while it was only an agreement as if it were a treaty. Of course, it was treated the same way in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, that might have been because immediately the day after, that was Tuesday. The Tuesday was a Supreme Court decision, apparently. Then Wednesday, that is when the president suddenly said, "Okay, we're changing our mind," and in some grammatically error-filled note verbal, wrote to the U.S. Embassy. Yeah, like
Okay.
that.
Jay, would you care to share your views about it? Would you know anything about it?
Which one? The
Uh,
The Supreme Court decision, Jay. When did that come about? I just read about it, but I don't know the details.
wait, because there are several Supreme Court decisions that are relevant. The one I remember most would
No,
be
in advance of the Jay Yung, in advance of that was Tuesday. I read it Tuesday. Wednesday, that was when the president backpedaled.
yes.
okay. Yes. Would you recall that decision when the Supreme Court called to the president that he should have consulted the Senate?
Sorry, I don't know of such a decision. I guess I must have missed it. Like Dr. Carlos, I don't read broadsheets.
Not anymore.
Okay, okay. Anyway, no problem.
Ito yung news na dumarating sa Facebook feed ko.
Yeah. Okay, okay. That is understandable. Chester, what's your view about this? Should the Senate have been consulted before we opted to get out of the VFA?
Yes, of course. The mere fact that we have different branches of government working hand in hand, that should be the case. No, we should not delimit the Senate to deliberate these important agreements with our treaty ally, with the U.S. Because basically, if later on the government would want to foster other relations with non-traditional partners, they have to undergo the same process where they have to engage with the Senate, and the Senate has to approve it, and then the Supreme Court will look at its legality. Definitely, it should be like that. No, and then the executive branch will execute it basically. So that's how it should be. No, basically, the three branches of the government should be working hand in hand. But looking at that, basically, I've talked to Greg Pauling recently in one of my podcasts, and he was like telling that Washington doesn't care actually what's happening with the VFA in the Philippines. So meaning to say that the decision of our government in abrogating the suspension of the abrogation of the VFA was actually abrupt and very it was not well thought, and there was no strategic framework in looking into that kind of decision making. And basically because Washington right now is distracted with so many issues with the viral and racial pandemics right now with the US, so they have less foresight of what's happening so far in the Philippines and also in the South China Sea.
Uh-huh. Okay. Dr. Jed, you're still in the United States. How are things going? Would you have any information about how people in the United States government look at the Philippines and the South China Sea issues?
Hello, hello.
Yeah? Jed? Hello? Can you hear me?
So Melo, sorry, sir, I had some audio problems. Can you
Yeah.
repeat that the
Okay.
question?
What's the complexion or what's the situation in your end in the United States?
So Melo, can you repeat the
yeah.
question, sir? Sorry, sir.
Yeah, you're in the United States. What do you think is the complexion of people in government towards the Philippines, the South China Sea, and the other issues? We're having some technical difficulties. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry, sir Melo. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So,
asking about the South China Sea.
yeah. How does the American people in American government look at the South China Sea? What have you heard? We're having difficulty. Yes. Okay.
Sir, I think are you referring to Lucia because she's based in the U.S. right now?
Okay. Lucio. Lucio, where are you? Let's try Lucio. Yes. You're still in the
Yes,
US. Yeah.
can you hear me?
Yes, of course. I can hear you.
Okay. Certainly, I think the decision to abrogate the VFA, the 6-month window allows both sides the time to actually discuss, of course, intractable issues in relation to the alliance. Again, as pointed out earlier by my more senior colleagues, since 2018, the Philippines intimated to the US side that we wanted a review of the Mutual Defense Treaty. I think in a hearing in the Senate this February this year, I think SND Lorenzana, our Secretary of Defense Lorenzana, mentioned that the US at that time doesn't want a review of the text. Although I think there was both sides eventually agreed to launch a low-level exploratory review of the treaty, which I think the results will be discussed this fall during the MDB-SEB meeting, the Mutual Defense Board Security Engagement Board meeting, which if it would not be affected by the pandemic will take place sometime this fall. So again, the situation here in the U.S. with of course the domestic unrest brought about by protests and rallies in relation to the unfortunate death of African American George Floyd in Minneapolis weeks past, and the need, not only for U.S. but also for the Philippines and as well as for other countries in the South China Sea to focus on the pandemic response. So I think the domestic situation in the Philippines, here in the U.S., and the situation brought about by the pandemic raises the salience of extending the time for both sides to discuss how to go forward with the alliance.
Okay. Thank you very much. We will now entertain questions from our colleagues from the media. Please let me know. Let's start with Pat Santos. Do you have some questions from Daily Tribune? Pat, good morning. Pat? Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. Sir, to anyone,
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yung tension po sa South China Sea, as far as we see ngayon, sa lumalabas sa video, very heightened na parang near clash yung mga ships. Ano sa tingin niyo yung pinaka-bagay na magpapatigil sa kaya pati Taiwan, yung takeover ng Taiwan, yung security. Parang kung titignan mo parang papunta na tayo sa gulo o even war. How do you see the situation ngayon po na will it explode into war na?
Into a shooting war. Ganun ba? Okay. Yeah. Sino kaya sa mga panelists natin? Siguro, let's ask Chester. Chester, do you see a shooting war in the South China Sea anytime soon?
Right now, China doesn't want that to happen because basically they're building their image in the international arena. No, basically they want they are aspiring to become a respected regional power although we see some bullying tactics of her coming from PLA. And then, of course, their biggest aspiration is to become a global leader, a superpower. We know that for a fact, given their grand strategy so far. The weakness of China is their soft power. They're investing so much with that. We've seen that through the Confucius Institutes and so other things, their mass diplomacy and so on, giving COVID aid to different countries around the world. But it seems like people are not totally convinced. Countries are not totally convinced with the intentions of China, because we see some of leadership vacuum right now in the global arena. But nonetheless, we cannot see yet war, because war is expensive. China is saving much money for their future investments for the world. And because of they also have that Silk Road Maritime and BRI program, so they have all this. Right now, they are retreating, especially for the post-COVID. Temporarily, they will retreat, but they will pursue more of economic pledges, and that's how they will do it, no, through economics and basically health recovery. But we will not see any war so far, because as much as possible, China would want to preserve its image as a good neighbor and as a respected global power. So
Yeah.
that's not the case.
Okay. Jen, would you care to share with us your views? Do you see a shooting war in the near future?
So Melo, so I think we cannot totally discount the possibility of an armed conflict especially in the South China Sea, because more often than not, led to conflicts are miscalculations. So let's say now, for instance, if China thinks that by doing something in the South China Sea, they would be able to safeguard their rights, assert their rights, but while as they do that, it's a slap in the face of the United States military power and credibility. So in response, the United States would be necessitated to do something. And so there you have it. If the United States then responds, China would then respond. So that would lead to a dangerous a downward spiral of security competition, which is not so good for us, small powers and littoral claimants, because geographically we're at the heart of the flashpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for us, what we can do, Sir Melo, is to really expedite a binding code of conduct that would include extra-regional powers, because a code of conduct that would not include all the relevant stakeholders would not be effective, because let's say China claims that what they're doing in the South China Sea is because of U.S. military actions and its allies' military actions. So if the United States is not part of it, then they will continue to do their FONOPs and disregard the feelings and interests of China. So while they negotiate on the trade front, I think they can also negotiate in the area of security.
Okay. Dr. Carlos, please, your views. Do you see a shooting war in the near future? God forbid.
I don't think it's likely, mainly because everyone else would be facing economic challenges because of the pandemic ongoing in some recovering, and therefore China would like to resume selling to the world. You cannot sell to your enemies, and so it is in the interest of China not to make enemies of people or countries to which she's selling. And as I said, we will really have to encourage China that it is not in her interest to continue her bellicose actions in the contested South China Sea. And she keeps on talking about a shared future, but that shared future should also be architectured by all of us and not just designed by her. There's a joke going around that the often quoted win-win solution of Xi Jinping is really that they will win twice, and I hope that will not happen. And we stupid people, let's pay attention also to, the modus operandi of China, which is happening right now in the border between that country and India. China, what it does, as it is what it's doing in the South China Sea and elsewhere in the world, is it establishes things de facto. That's what they did in Aksai Chin. And now they have occupied Aksai Chin, which used to be part of India. And that's why the continuing skirmishes there now is happening in the midst of the pandemic. So China did the same thing here in the South China Sea, destroyed our reefs and established 7 artificial islands. And so let's be smart. And whenever we negotiate with China, that, after all, anything and everything that is happening here, it will only happen because we consented to it. So, let's not jump up and down later on saying that China has exploited us. We allowed ourselves to be exploited. And so, again, I go back, Melo, to the earlier comment I made, that there must be some strategic thinking happening here in our country. So we're not doing things in fits and starts, advancing, then backpedaling, and so on. I know that is strategy to confuse the enemy, but I think that is not even a strategy. It's just because we don't have a strategy at all. So that's
Okay.
really the biggest deficit that we have here.
Yeah, okay. Dr. Lucio, your thoughts about this?
Sir, hindi pa po ako doktor, pero thank you
Coming
for
soon.
promoting me.
Coming soon.
Uh, Thank you, sir. So I think with the increasing number of gray and white players in the South China Sea, be it coming from the claimant states or from other powers, from other maritime powers, the risk for miscalculation, the risk for accidents also increases. So I think this is where the importance of hotline communications, confidence building, and dispute management comes into play. Um, so certainly, China at this time wants to show strength amidst all of these challenges with the pandemic, with maritime and territorial disputes with neighbors. But at the same time, overly playing that, being very assertive on these fronts, may only invite further backlash, as we are seeing right now. For instance, in the South China Sea, we see littoral states, not even direct claimants, say for instance Indonesia, coming up with note verbals that begin to reference the 2016 arbitration ruling. So I think these are steps being taken by countries who feeling the heat, from China's increasingly assertive response to contested maritime or land spaces. So I think China should try to calibrate its actions in order not to invite further backlash from within its immediate neighborhood, as well as from other powers from distant shores. So I think the COC, the South China Sea, is very important. But again, with the climate of the pandemic right now, I don't think it would get the urgency and the resources that it deserves. So I mean, it's a pity we postponed it for decades, and now we had made some progress in recent years. But I think now it will again be put in abeyance because most countries would focus on pandemic response.
Uh-huh.
But again, I cannot overstate the importance of a binding and effective code of conduct in trying to mitigate or manage, these incidents in the South China Sea, which, as I said, will only bound to increase as you have more assets flying into the South China Sea, whether conducting FONOPs, whether doing patrols, whether escorting fishing or militia vessels in the South China Sea. So again, the COC, if it's not gonna come by anytime soon, an interim measure should help, but there is no substitute for a binding and a durable COC, which I think initially would try to envelope the claimant states and later should be open to other maritime powers to accede. So I think that is how things should work out in order to prevent a shooting war.
Okay, thank you. Attorney Jay,
Yeah,
before
yeah,
given the situation.
I agree with everyone that the chances of a shooting war erupting are small, no? But that does not discount, that does not prevent the possibility of a small skirmish, no? It has happened before, no? Little skirmishes, especially with Vietnam, no? Which change the situation on the ground, in which there are casualties, but which do not escalate into full-blown war, no? That possibility still remains. And yung kanina, yung tinanong nga, no, what would stop the tensions? Actually, it's China. If only it would stop pressing itself and imposing itself on the surrounding smaller states, if only it would stop with this ridiculous expansive claim, no? It would actually contribute a lot, no? It would probably remove all the possibility of or reduce it greatly yung possibility na magkaroon na ng miscalculation which erupts into a conflict, however small. I would also like to state na the problem of China is that especially in the past year, no, it has changed its foreign policy posture. They're now talking at this. They now call it wolf warrior diplomacy. No, so it's really in your face and very much offensive, quite offensive to a number of countries. No, it's like they're really overstepping their bounds, and whatever charm they had before is being viewed now as nothing more than a facade. Now combine that with the fact that everybody's in crisis with this pandemic, combine that with the mounting distrust of whatever it's doing anywhere, no? I mean, here in the region as well as elsewhere, no? And naturally, what results is that it is actually building up, no? China itself is building up a united front against it, no? Through this wolf warrior diplomacy, added to their posturing in the South China Sea, added to their posturing with India and surrounding countries. So all of that would will diminish greatly if they just stepped back, no, and be a bit more reasonable, and you know, give up this need for them to appear strong, appear powerful in any situation. Here, it is clearly very counterproductive for them. And if they want to ensure that their plans for the 2050, the 100-year marathon, if they want to be sure that they will finish it, they better stop this attitude of theirs that they're out to basically conquer the world, and they're going to be number one without caring for how it affects all the other countries.
Okay. We have a question from a colleague from FOCAP, Leap One. Yes, Leap, good morning.
Good morning, Melo.
Yeah. For whom is the question?
Oh, okay. Here's my question. What do you think will happen to the joint exploration of the gas and oil in the South China Sea, considering what happened recently, especially the pandemic? How will it affect the progress of the joint exploration of Philippines and China? Thank you.
Okay. Jay?
Put it simply, nothing. Not much at this point. For one thing, the urgency to reach a deal is now parang purely for the political side, no? And it's purely for presentation. The practical aspects of it really, the need and the feasibility of offshore exploration right now is rather low because oil prices are low. Any oil company, even the state oil company, will think twice before spending an enormous amount of resources with only 10% chance of finding anything. No? So that urgency to come up with a deal and do oil exploration, I think, has receded to the background. It's not as urgent anymore, I think, for both sides. And then, as we know, as of the last meeting, the two panels, the two committees are still in deadlock over how to actually formulate this agreement. No? It's pretty clear that both sides are still on their respective starting points for negotiation, and they haven't actually moved very much. So it's probably going to take a longer time, even a longer time.
Yeah. Okay. Follow up, Deep?
Okay. No, no more.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Would our other resource persons have something to say about it? Professor Carlos? Yes, ma'am?
Articulated this before. The key concept there is joint. I think we now know what happened in case of the Philippine rice, what that jointness looked like. So like in anything, joint should be from the beginning. There should be a joint designing of whatever it is of that joint activity would look like. And yeah, and that's the crux really of this agreement. So in the meanwhile that everybody's engaged in responding to the pandemic's consequences, I think this will be put on hold or would just be there. And then also to reiterate that we're moving towards more and more towards renewables, and this becomes less and less salient to everybody. You will notice the only reason why oil now has jumped to, has gone up to 30 or 40, I think, dollars per barrel is that they're only reducing production. Otherwise, if you will recall, last time it even went to negative territory, meaning they will pay you if they get their oil because there's just too much of it. There's so much glut. So they cannot sustain this, and there are really many, many things moving all around. There's so many, many moving parts. But in the order of priority, this will not be in the top 10 because just dealing with the pandemic and its aftermath will be in the list of everybody else, including China for that matter.
Thank you. Let me ask Dr. Cabalza. There's this basic question. Can the Philippines survive on its own without the Americans?
Yeah, of course. Basically, that's what we're trying to achieve so far, the self-reliance, military self-reliance. And, although there are some indicators that we're going to that direction so far. But basically, you have a good example would be Vietnam and Indonesia. They don't have any defense agreements with major powers, but look at them. They are powerful regionally speaking. No? So we can look at that template as a model. And basically, if we can sustain, although we tried a lot of modernization programs so far during the time of President Ramos and, of course, Benigno Aquino administration that we had so far. And now, since in a way we have money to buy some military hardware, and of course, when we also buy military hardware, it should also jive with the human resource, because how can you buy those tanks and some submarines if you don't train your human resource? So I mean to say that it should be both ways. As you buy, as you upgrade your military capability, you also have to train your people, the pilots, the military, basically those things. No, and really, we're geared towards that direction so far. But as of now, we're not yet. It's not yet robust. It's not. We cannot yet do it. That's why we did alliances, and I think we're going to that direction.
Oh, okay. I remember asking then Foreign Secretary Albert Del Rosario during my first engagement with FOCAP. I asked him, why do we have to satisfy ourselves with the hand-me-downs from the United States? Boats older than the captains who would lead the ship, no?
Right.
And he said, well, this we get it at very cheap prices. But I said, I heard we have to buy the armaments
Yeah, I
because
agree.
what we get is just the bare boat.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
don't you think it will be better for the Philippines to look for other countries where we could get our supplies?
Yeah, we're looking for some alternative partners for the supply so far. We know for the fact that the Philippines is engaging with Russia so far and some other countries like Italy. And in the defense department, they also have some priority. The first list so far when it comes to buying some military equipment. And basically, it depends with the priority. And also one of the just I agree to everyone else, especially to Dr. Carlos when she told us that there's no strategy at all. Meaning to say that the problem with the Philippines is that we have many aspirations and we want to acquire more military hardware and equipment. But nonetheless, what's the basis for that? So we have to really have a strategy, especially that it's changing. Before we wanted to focus on territorial strategy, and then we shifted to naval air powers because of our external problems in the South China Sea, the West Philippine Sea. So it keeps on changing. So when we look at national security, it should not be binary, not looking only on the external and the internal, but as a whole. So something like that. When we do some strategy, policy making to a stronger national strategy, we should look at the entirety of the problem and not to have a binary opposition on looking at only the external and the internal. So basically, we have to equip our country in such a way that it will have a minimum defense posture so far.
Okay, good. Brief question for Dr. Carlos. Dr. Carlos, you mentioned that we lack strategies. While the Americans have a bald eagle as their symbol, are you saying that the Philippines symbol is a headless chicken running circles?
Uh, maybe worse.
Really?
But the thing is, there are too many talking heads, and the talking heads are not talking with each other. I've seen this before. Of course, Melo, I've been with defense sometime in the past. But
Yes.
yes, and it's good if we have so many voices, and then you come out and put them together, and you have one strategy. Rather than what we're doing now, where we're just reacting to things, we're not looking at it on a bigger or perspective. And yes, if like there are so many moving parts now.
Mhm.
And if we are just relying on a lot of these people who are really in positions where they should be thinking about strategies, really they're just doing admin work, and there's no strategy whatsoever that's happening in their midst. So,
Okay.
and they're just multi-located. There are just too many of them really thinking in different directions. I'm sorry for the dogs barking
Oh,
in
is
the
it?
back.
All right. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I have to mute that first.
Yeah.
I
Okay
will
po.
just join in a.
Sandali lang. Okay. Yeah, Dr. Pitlo, yes. You were about to say something about the exploration. Yes, please.
Yes, so I will just add a couple of points to what was already mentioned. So the first one, I think this was already raised by Sir Jay and I think Sir Carlo, Ma'am Carlos. The market, in the immediate horizon, I think the low demand for oil and energy because of the need to kickstart the economy again. So I think the low demand environment and the slump, it will take time for oil and gas to recover. So I think there's no urgency on the part of
Yeah.
to exploration activities in the Reed Bank at this point. Secondly, I think with just 2 years in his term of office, I think the present administration will be put in a bit of a precarious position because I think the durability of any agreement that would be discussed or agreed by both sides at this point may be adversely affected or even overturned when a new administration comes into being in 2022.
Okay.
So the risk of political discontinuity may not bode well for the drive of both sides to accelerate, step on the discussions for joint exploration at this time.
Okay, so what you're saying, Lucio, is nobody will be more secured if they negotiate now because President Duterte is about to end his term. Is that it? Hello? Anyway, yeah, okay. Jay?
Yeah, probably on your question. No? If you look at it from the side, from the Philippine side, where the ones who represent the Philippines in a joint exploration is supposedly the private sector, mga service contractors, no? There is a huge disincentive for them because oil prices are low, and sa kanila yung mapupunta yung burden. The burden is on the private contractors, the service contractors, to be the one to negotiate deals with China, for the joint exploration. Now, if the Chinese counterpart is CNOOC and they look at it and they're looking at it purely from a commercial perspective, then they're gonna count the numbers. They're gonna see whether they're gonna profit from this or lose. And given the high risks involved in petroleum exploration, they're gonna end up saying, nope, it's not worth it to do anything right now with oil prices being low. On the part of China, on the other hand, CNOOC, of course, is a state-owned company. And so they can make decisions purely on the basis of political, could be a purely political decision rather than a commercial decision.
Okay.
For them, they might have the incentive of simply coming up with a paper agreement that actually they have no intention of really implementing. It's just something to show to the rest of the region, look, we have a joint development with the Philippines, you should do the same. Or else we will send our oil rigs into your exclusive economic zones and continental shelf, and we will explore for oil anyway, which is what they did with Vietnam. It's what they did recently with Malaysia. Okay? So, yun yung magiging objective nila for producing such an agreement. No? It's not really for actual exploration that can, for as far as they're concerned, okay lang, even if that doesn't happen, that's fine for them because the Philippines will they will be able to tie the hands of the Philippines and keep them from exploring oil in the South China Sea. And that's really their minimum objective.
Okay.
With Malaysia and Vietnam, they want them to stop all their oil exploration. Kaya nga, they've gone so far as to really intimidate them by sending oil rigs escorted by Coast Guard and Navy ships to engage even the Vietnamese and the Malaysians in tactics at sea. No?
Okay. All right.
Ganun yung magiging situation natin dyan. So we might end up with just a political agreement that in the end is meant to tie our hands into not exploring at all in the South China Sea for a long time to come.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Jed, Dr. Ravena, your thoughts about it?
Yes, sir, Mel.
Yeah.
Yeah, sir. Before I just mention something about the joint exploration, I'd like to inject some thoughts about the potential flashpoints between the U.S. and China.
Okay.
I think apart from having a really binding legal document that would bind everybody in the region, or apart from the fact that both the U.S. and China can arrive at a consensus in the South China Sea, another great power flashpoint could erupt over Taiwan. Sir. So it's not just the South China Sea. Even if they do agree on the South China Sea, a disagreement could happen over Taiwan. So that's another flashpoint in the region. Sir. As to the joint exploration, sir, I think I would agree with everybody, sir, that right now the priority, I think, of the Duterte government is to deal with the COVID pandemic, and that's the priority. And secondly, I don't think, sir, the political environment, the political climate is ripe for joint exploration, because that would only diminish the political capital of the Duterte government, considering that how China is seen nowadays. But however, sir, I do think that what both panels can do, I mean, both Chinese and Philippine panels could do is, just to continue to explore what possible arrangements or legal frameworks could be arranged. But as to if that will be implemented or as to how that will be applied is another matter. Perhaps that could be up to the next administration to
Okay.
execute. But right now, I guess it's a low probability that it will still really push through.
All right. Okay. We're about to end our program this morning. Let me just ask our friends, our resource persons, for their brief remarks on what they see in the Philippines-U.S. relations, Philippines-China relations. And we also have to look at another elephant growing in the room, and that's India, because there are reports that by next year, the Indian population would overtake that of China. So India has, come of age as well. So let's start. Jed, what are your thoughts about the coming days? Yes, please.
So I think with India, they do have an Act East policy, sir, which means that they really want to make their presence felt in our part of the world, in East Asia, the Asia Pacific, and that's why they're also receptive to the idea of the Indo-Pacific vision. And as for us, sir, I think this relates to the president's independent foreign policy because we have plans of acquiring military assets from India, in particular the BrahMos missile. So we are not just depending on the U.S. now for military assets, but we are getting from India, we are getting from Israel, we are getting from South Korea, from the European countries. So we see some adjustments. We see a diversification of our of building up our defense capabilities.
Okay, very good, very nice. But don't you think at the same time the Philippines should also consider its food security?
Right, sir. That is that should be a core priority, sir. Especially in this time of the pandemic.
Yeah, okay. All right. Dr. Lucio
May I
Pitlo.
just make
Yes, ma'am.
one reaction in regard to that?
Yes,
Yeah,
ma'am.
this is just our point. We cannot just keep on buying and buying these things. The buying should be, in fact, dependent on a strategy. Why are you buying a submarine? Why are you buying this, that from wherever? So the buying is the last part that you do. But because you're making money there, that's the first thing that you do. You should do the strategy first. The buying will be the last one that you will do.
Okay. All right. What about food security, Dr. Carlos?
Well, let me go back to my favorite regional fishing agreement. That's food security, the fish, the sea plants, the seaweeds, these are all things that have to be talked about there. So let's just stop pushing this code of conduct because we've been doing that and we're not getting anything. So let's push this food security. Do you know that China now is practically dictating to everybody when to fish, when not to fish, and where to fish and where not to fish? She practically owns the whole contested seawater. So why are we allowing her to do that? We should be part of that. Where is the shared part of the shared future that Xi Jinping is talking about? Let's ask him to operationalize those terms that he uses.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Lucio? Yes, please.
Yeah, certainly. I think I go with what Dr. Carlos earlier mentioned. I think it's important to press on China the need to, instead of a unilateral fishing ban, for instance, I think claimant states, China and the rest of ASEAN should push for a joint or coordinated fishing ban. In this way, I think we would avoid making use of the marine environmental card to bolster one's sovereignty or sovereign rights claims over the contested sea. So I think this is something that should be done. And while we cannot make any progress in the COC at this time, I think the idea of a regional maritime commons, fishing grounds, and even, for instance, the idea of a marine protected area, which is not something new, which had been proposed for decades. I think with this pandemic, And with the issue of the climate change, with rising sea level, which will all affect claimant states and beyond. I think this um, compels us to revisit, the idea to have greater interdependence in cooperation instead of one or two countries using the environmental card to assert their claims, which had already been invalidated. Uh, yeah, so yeah, I think that's one.
Mhm.
Um, the importance of diversifying our defense partners has been underscored. I think it's also very important that we continue treading that path, but again, the overall strategy before we put the nuts and bolts into it, I think that has to be laid out very clear. And I think in relation to dealing with major powers, for instance, with the U.S., if we want to sustain this alliance, if we want to have a greater voice or a greater agency in charting the direction of this alliance, that is something that is legitimate. But I think we have to avoid unnecessarily uh, making optics or rhetoric to the contrary. I think that there is a latitude that should be given, to show some kind of dexterity. But I think overplaying it is also not good, because too much unpredictability will affect, you know,
Mhm.
uh, decades old security partnership.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yes, Dr. Chester.
First of all, regarding the India factor there, aside from the security and defense security that we have had with India, I think we have to look also at the economic gains that India can give to us in terms of the business process outsourcing. Of course, we know for a fact that India is a pioneering when it comes to that industry, and of course, cyber, they were very good at that, aerospace, agriculture, because of food security. Imagine they're feeding billions of people in their country, so we could at least have a leverage on how they do that also. And medicine is very important because India is a
Yeah.
powerhouse, especially that we're still in the pandemic searching for the vaccine for the coronavirus. I think India can help us with that. And basically, if we try to engage with China, aside from their Indo-Pacific vision, also, I think there are more things that we can gain from India there. As regards to our future relationship with the US, I think the crucial will be the 2022 presidential elections in the Philippines, and of course, but before that, we will see also what will happen by November this year. If President Trump gets reelected, I think there will be no major or important strategic maneuvering that they will offer for us, especially in the South China Sea. But we'll see what happens later on, because basically we rely to those kinds of changes, and those are part of the evolutionary process on how we engage with major powers like the United States and India.
Yeah. But one thing is sure, whoever wins,
Mm.
he would still be an American, right?
Definitely, yeah, of course. American with different interests,
Yeah.
perhaps.
Okay.
Hello, may I weigh in on that?
Yes,
In
ma'am.
regard to that?
Yes.
Yeah, while we're talking about strategic planning, let us also remember that Trump has been asking everyone else across the Atlantic, across the Pacific, to share in the burden of defense. That's the reason why it now is pulling out 1/4 of its troops in Germany, which did not make Merkel happy. And it has asked Japan to ratchet up its support for the troops there, 60,000 of them, from 2 billion to 8 billion. And it has asked South Korea to increase its share by 400%. Where am I going on this, Melo? What I'm saying is that let us prepare for when the US will also ask us to share in the expenses of the military troops here in the 5 military bases. I don't know the numbers. I think I don't know even the sharing, but Jay earlier talked about warrior diplomacy, and I think the U.S. is now waging a cashier diplomacy. Like you want the U.S. troops there, you pay for them. That's the businessman in Trump, by the way.
Really? Okay. All right. Can we hear Jay,
Yes.
Attorney Jay? How do you
Yeah.
look at the near future Philippines-China relations, Philippines-US relations? Yes.
Siguro, it's hard to forecast naman, no? But there are some things that probably you should keep in mind, no matter what kind of forecast you try to do. Number one is the disruption that this pandemic has caused. It's huge. It has completely disrupted economies. It has completely disrupted economic plans, no, and all the projections. Okay, so there's going to be a lot of adjustment going on, and you're probably going to see the setting of even the regional economy after this initial waves start going down. Earlier, I think I saw a report where the World Bank was estimating huge numbers of people being pushed into poverty. We also know that a lot of businesses, small, medium enterprises, basta natin mga 40% have gone bankrupt, no? And so many other and many large companies are closing shop, no? So even the big multinationals will be drawing down on their operations because the economic outlook, the consumption, is going to be quite low for a while. The oil prices, which still is an important factor in powering economies, they've gone very low because of low demand. So the impact of this will still be quite long. That affects the second factor, which is China's how shall we call it, consistency. Okay, they will still try to do what they had planned to do, which was to turn China into a first world type of country by 2050. But those plans are now going to be even more difficult to achieve given what has happened, because all of a sudden whatever projections you made about your finances, your economics, your ability to pull in other markets, all of that now has to be reset again. So even if they have this Maritime Silk Road and Belt and Road strategy that they committed to, whether or not those commitments can still be fulfilled is really in question. And that will now have an effect on their ability to achieve their plans. The thing is, it is directly tied to their need to satisfy the population of China, no? Yung needs niya, economic needs. The trade-off in China is that we'll give you economic prosperity, in exchange you give us political stability, meaning the Communist Party. Give them the stability in their positions of power. That is going to come under increased pressure. And we've seen that certain long historical problems that they have, like Hong Kong and Taiwan and of course Xinjiang, they're just, parang percolating and simmering there. And they're ready to come over to a boil. We've seen that happen with Hong Kong. These are parang things that might introduce unexpected elements, critical, things that might push them over the edge on some issues, on some things, which might introduce even more instability in the situation. So in a way, whatever we forecast now about China, about the economy, we can't really say that they're as reliable as they used to be. Before we were very comfortable with making forecasts, and usually they would come through. But now, because of this, it's much less reliable. And then you have the U.S.-China competition also, which is taking these strange sudden twists and turns. Now, as long as Trump is there, it will be as unpredictable and maybe as tense as it has been. But I think that even if Trump is not elected, a subsequent, a Democratic president will probably still be as the pressure on China from a Democrat president probably be still as high. No, it's only a matter of how what you call that, how in their face the president will be. No, we can probably expect that he'll be a little bit more finessed, a little bit more democratic. Sorry, a little bit more diplomatic in how he faces things. But in terms of the pressure, it will probably still be as high. And the same thing probably with the other Western powers like the EU, because this so-called wolf warrior diplomacy nga, and I'm pretty sure that they're reassessing and also resetting now how they deal with China based on that. No, so amidst all of that, the Philippines, no, that's our problem in a way, no, because the current administration, well, simply put, it has given a lot of concessions to China, expecting that China will reciprocate with financial and infrastructure assistance. And with 2 years left to its term, we still have basically nothing from China when you compare it with other countries. Japan is still providing more infrastructure assistance to us than China, despite those 4 years and despite all of those accommodations. So come 2022, there could be there could be a backlash pa rin. And whoever succeeds this administration will probably also face pressure, domestic pressure, to change its policy with China, no, and make it less of what it is today. No, so that again, introduces new opportunities for surprises.
Okay.
No?
All right. Very well. Thank you. Thank you, Jay. Professor Carlos, how would you summarize all the issues we've talked about this morning?
Well, to wrap up all the discussions around us, I think what is prominent and what everybody agrees with is that we really need to do so much strategic thinking now that there's so many challenges around us. Not only challenges on health, but challenges about climate change and their consequences, which we know will already happen. It's just a question of when it will happen. And therefore, I'm glad that the Balikatan now, as it was planned last year, because they do the planning a year before, was really planned as an HADR activity. And I'm glad also that Japan had articulated and has in fact was observer last year, plans to really actively train and exercise with us. And the same with Russia, the same with Vietnam, and also with China. By the way, little known and not always announced and seen in the papers is that, when you look at scientific cooperation among the marine scientists, I have a neighbor here is from the marine science, and he tells me that, Claire, there is no problem with the Chinese marine scientists. We just talk about, marine science and understanding the sea and the sea plants, etc. We never talk about territory or sovereignty. It's not anything that that is salient to us. And I think that is where we want to go. While China is in a militaristic mode, I hope there would be scientists there, and there are many scientists there, academics like us, who would like to shift the trajectory to less military means. As Jay and the other resource persons here had correctly noted, now is not the time to do all these military actions, even that of the United States with Australia and its aircraft carriers. I mean, what's the point? The point now is to deal with the pandemic, and that can be dealt with only if we cooperate all around. This is the sharing that Xi Jinping should talk about, not really one country, fighting in opposition to another country. Like now, I was so disturbed by news coming in that already the Western countries who have the wherewithal have already cornered and asked AstraZeneca, which will come out with the vaccine by September or October, billions of vaccines. And what? The rest of the rest of the world will just die. So, this pandemic really brought home the sheer inequality internally in our countries
Yeah.
and externally among the other countries. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay. Mga kaibigan, I'd like to say thank you to all the resource persons. Pero naalala ko kasi yung sinabi ng isang mambabatas, wala namang visa yung isda, walang passport. So kung ganun yung isip ng mambabatas, saan kaya tayo pupulutin? Sabi ng isang lawyer sa Bicol, Your Honor, where do you pick? Sabi nung judge, what do you mean by that, counsel? Saan ka nga pupuruton, judge? Anyway, I'd like to say thank you. It's been another wonderful discussion with our resource persons and our esteemed media colleagues. Their views are of utmost importance to us. Aside from saying thank you to our guests and colleagues, let me quote an Asian named Sun Tzu, who was quoted saying, "Victory is reserved for those who are willing to pay its price." He was also remembered for this: a battle avoided cannot be lost. And another man from another era was heard saying, change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change we seek. And his name is Barack Obama. Thank you, everyone. God bless us all. Please stay safe. Salamat pong lahat sa inyo. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.